Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. My name is Brian Martinez, and I am here hosting Fireside Chat number 18 with our special guest, Allen Frantzen. Hello, Allen. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And Karen is here to join us, as she's, because she's Karen, and you guys love Karen too. So, hey, Karen.
Hi, everybody. I was just really interested in actually sitting in on this one, and I'm gonna try to not talk too much and let the guys, hash all this out. So, but hi, thanks for coming, Alan, and I appreciate it.
Yeah. Before we get into this, I think that this quote, this is a bit of an anecdote. I think that's it's related in a way to what we're going to be discussing. I saw this really hilarious tweet that was shared by Milo Yiannopoulos, who you may know as a very, a relatively popular with the sort of gamergay crowd, and he's like a conservative gay provocateur, and he often appears on BBC shows and stuff. And he likes to poke fun at people, and especially angry feminist types. And there was a feminist who made a tweet at Milo that read, "At Nero," that's his Twitter handle. It read, "Hey Nero, the Dark Ages called, and they want their Neanderthal back." And he shared it because he thought it was so hilarious. Because there's so much about it that's just wrong. So, Alan, we understand. First of all, we want to get to know who you are. So, I guess my question is, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and but how long you've been doing it.
So I just retired a couple years ago. I am a medievalist. My specialty is pretty much the 6th to the 11th centuries in England. I taught at Loyola University for about 38 years. I taught at Oberlin College for a couple of years before that. And a few years ago, I published a book on chivalry in World War I, and I got very interested in heroic masculinity, and then I just threw out the heroic part and started thinking about masculinity. But I've been working with medieval culture, medieval English culture, for 40 years. It's been my entire life. I've published 8 books. I've edited about that many books. And so I've been at this a long time, and written a lot of articles and so on and so forth. Does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah. No, that's great. And just out of curiosity, how did you come to find... in all of your work, which I find really interesting, I looked at your essay and some of the stuff that's been written about you. At what point did you come to find problems with the whole, what you call the feminist fog? Like, what was your red pill moment, I guess?
Yes, that's a really good question. I ask that question a lot. It actually came a few years ago when I joined a men's group. And I realized as we were getting to know each other that almost every man in the room was complaining about his relationship with a woman, and that they all had the same problem, that their lives were being run for them. The example, the image that I developed in my mind was that these men were like rats in a cage, and there was a woman standing over them in a white coat, and she had a little device in her hand, and if the rat was good, he would get a little pellet of food, and if the rat misbehaved, looked the wrong way, or wore the wrong shirt, or drank too much beer, I don't know what, he'd get a little shock through the floor. And pretty much the way these rats looked to me was that they were scared to move. They were always looking over their shoulder to see if they were on the right track. And I just wondered what happened to their masculinity and their sense of self-respect. And I realized that, at least in my mind, they all had the same problem. And that it wasn't just a few men I knew, because I didn't know any of the men in this group. They were everything from electricians and plumbers to lawyers, and they all talked the same way about their primary relationships. In the language of this men's group, which shocked me the first time I heard it, but I don't suppose it's so shocking to other people, somebody else had their balls. They simply were not in charge of their own masculinity. So that was about 4 years ago. I would say that weekend, that was my red pill moment, and I thought, what's happened here?
Yeah, no, that is kind of eye-opening. It's funny how much of that is going on that people don't see, and it's like a everyday kind of thing.
Yes, I think that.
Well, I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
Yeah, well, I think the fact that it was a men's group, right, and so these men are speaking unguardedly in ways they wouldn't necessarily around the water cooler.
Absolutely right. Crucial. It was one of those occasions when the barriers dropped. In fact, although this sounds like a joke, we were sitting around without any clothes on, just because that was the whole idea. You haven't got anything to hide. We're all men here. We're trying to get to some truth about ourselves, and so I think these people told a lot of stories that they wouldn't have told otherwise. I think you're exactly right.
Oh, so it was kind of like a retreat kind of thing?
Yes, it was. It was sort of an initiation weekend. I was very skeptical about this, but honestly, because in my mind, I always thought that men's groups were like Iron John and that sort of thing, and I really just didn't take it seriously. But I had been working with a boxing coach, which also was influential in my red pill experience, and he was in this movement. And I started boxing when I was 63, so I had a lot of baggage to bring to this whole boxing experience. And he talked to me in a way that no coach or trainer had ever talked to me before, about ways in which, as a man, I was keeping myself from doing better. And he suggested I get into this group, and because I had so much respect for him, I thought, what the hell, I'll give it a whirl. So I actually went on a men's weekend. Something I really never thought I would do any more than I thought I'd get in a boxing ring. Professors sit behind books and computers and talk for a living, you know. We don't sit around in a circle of men without our clothes on talking about who's got our balls.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that I think that maybe we need more like of those kinds of things for men, like male retreats and like places where men can drop their guards and, like Karen said, kind of speak plainly about stuff. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, speaking in a way that's not that. Karen's example I thought was great around the water cooler. We don't really talk about ourselves honestly around the water cooler. That's part of an act.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, that's more about talking about events and other people, right?
Well, at work, I think you're always posturing, and you're always sort of protecting your place in the hierarchy, and or trying to climb it.
I think that's it. The competition there. I think that's a great point. The competition there is disguised. Everybody knows there's a hierarchy. Everybody knows they're in competition, but it's just not okay to acknowledge it. That was the great thing about boxing for me. Boxing is competitive, and it is out there. That's the only reason you're boxing, is to compete, right?
Yeah.
And to me, that black and white, very cut and dried thing was terrific, because in boxing, especially for a beginner and even for professionals, there is no shame in losing, because boxing is tough. Direct head-to-head competition, whether it's two women boxing or two men, that's tough. And there's no honor in coming in second. The only honor is in giving up the fight. Two people box, one is going to win, one is going to lose, almost always. It's a game of skill, but what is so refreshing about it to me is that it's open competition. Most competition, I think, between men and women, between women or between men, is concealed, just like Karen's example around the water cooler. You know you're competing, but you're not going to say you're competing. You're going to make a joke about competing or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm. What made you decide to get into boxing as a, was it just for exercise, or was it for this sort of other thing that you got out of it, this like look into masculinity?
It was, I saw a busboy in a restaurant who had a lot of muscles. He had the word Crusader tattooed down his arm, and at one point he just shadowboxed around one of his fellow busboys, and this other busboy just froze. And this guy, you know, he was playing, but he just flashed a few punches around him, and I thought, well, that is competition between men. That's really striking. I want to do that. I want to be somebody who knows how to throw punches like that. So your opponent just stands there and says, wow. And I dismissed it until I saw in the gym where I worked out, I saw a woman boxing. And I asked my coach if he'd let me put on boxing gloves. And he said, well, okay. And so he showed me a few moves, and then he held up a mitt. And he said, so throw a punch. And I did, and he sort of smirked. And then he wiped the smirk off his face because he was charging me $90 an hour, and he didn't want to be insulting. But you know what I knew? He was telling me, he said, not like that. He said, that's more like you're slapping me. Well, that was code for saying I punched like a girl. And in the old days, that would have been all I needed to hear. I would have been so ashamed and embarrassed. I said, oh, let's go back to whatever we were doing. But I thought, what the hell, you know, I'm paying this guy $90 an hour. I want to learn to do this. So that was my stand-up moment. I said, okay, show me again. And he showed me this basic stuff about throwing my jab. And I learned a little bit, you know, right there on the spot. And then I started to hit his mitt. And in a couple minutes, I was hitting his mitt as hard as I could possibly hit it. And he said, okay. And he threw the mitt down and said, we're going to do something else. That hurts. That was the first time in my life I had ever settled a score in that directly using physical strength. I was hooked. It's a terrible story, but you know, it was just so black and white. It was so not like the water cooler. This guy smirked at me. He doesn't respect me. He thinks I punch like a girl. I'm going to show him I can throw enough punches so he's going to want to stop. And he did. That was great. To me, that was a new experience.
Yeah, in a way, you were competing against yourself too, right?
Absolutely, because my first instinct was shame. Oh no! Of course you. What are you doing in these stinking boxing gloves anyway? You know, like get back to this nice, neat sort of exercise stuff that you do with this guy. But I loved the smell of old sweat in these gloves. I thought, wow, I actually have boxing gloves on. And I thought, I went this far. I'm gonna hit this guy's mitt until he can't take it anymore, and I did. That's great.
Yeah.
And
it seems like, you know, the way that a lot of times feminists talk about masculinity, they make it all sound like it's all bravado and it's all testosterone and it's all destructive, and there isn't a something kind of you know, self-reflective in it that involves you know, a degree of like, you know, introspection, where you say, oh, this is something I need to improve in myself, you know, which requires some what's the word I'm looking for? It asks you to be humble, essentially, you know, to say, oh, these are areas that I need to be stronger in, or I want to be stronger in. You
put your finger on it a minute ago. I thought you got it exactly right. You're competing with yourself. You know, that sort of shame-based, you know, stick to things you do well. Talk, write, cook, you know. Only show the world your strengths. That keeps a lot of a man's masculinity hidden from himself. It keeps him from thinking he can't show the world, hey, okay, I'm a crummy boxer, but what the hell, you know, I just started. Let me be a crummy boxer. If you can't be a beginner, how are you going to learn? And I thought that the idea was I had to compete with my shame-based self and say, yeah, okay, I'm his client. He's well paid. Teach me how to do this. I'm not going to fold up. and go back to my computer. Show me. How can I do this better than I did? I had to overcome that fear and shame, of not being excellent.
I think what feminists tend to misjudge about masculinity is they see it as like bullying and belittling and shaming other men, and there is some belittling and shaming of other men, but within masculine culture, so much of that is actually a challenge to you to get your balls back.
Yeah, that's exactly
right. And if you pass, I mean, like, you've done it, and it's got to be a huge boost. And to sort of portray that challenging as just bullying and meanness and shaming is, I think it's not looking at it in a comprehensive way. So
yeah.
May I just add to what you said there, Karen? Feminists are excellent at bullying and shaming. Look at what they've been saying about me for the last 2 weeks.
I have some quotes.
Yeah.
I'd like to read them if we could. Well, I'm just looking at the article that the Chronicle wrote.
Right.
So you had one critic named Eileen A. Joy who wrote, "It's too easy to take his blog and point out everything that is wrong with it and label him a misogynist and walk away from it like it's a car wreck." And she also wrote, "He was symptomatic of a field that is stunning for its racism, homophobia, and misogyny." And we're talking about the medieval studies?
Yes, right.
Okay, so let's unpack that. I mean, she doesn't actually present any examples or evidence or anything, at least from what I have, but where would something like that come from, that opinion?
In the tremendous amount of support that I've heard from complete strangers in the last 2 weeks, so many people have pointed out the same thing. On the first page of my masculinity pages, I say, if you challenge feminism in any way, you will be labeled a man-hater and a misogynist and dismissed, and that is exactly what she's doing. It's too easy to disagree with my ideas. She couldn't even tell you. She couldn't pass a quiz on my ideas. She didn't see anything. All she could see by taking a look was, oh, wow, what's this? Not friendly to feminism, bad. So she says it's too easy to do this. So, then what they can do, and what they did do, was rather than look at all of the content, they attacked me.
Yeah. Well, that's a common tactic of feminists to equate feminism to women. So criticizing feminism means criticizing women.
Right.
Or, being anti-feminism means being anti-woman, and these things are not the same.
Right. I call this compulsory feminism. It's the only way you can look at anything anymore. If you're not feminist, there's something wrong with you. It's compulsory feminism.
Well, yeah, we're used to that, doing what we do. And in fact, one of the speeches that I gave last year in Georgia at Kennesaw State University was titled "Feminism is Not Compulsory." It's not. And I think that this attitude that they have, it's starting to backfire on them. I mean, because, a year ago in the U.S., it was 25% of people or so called themselves feminists. Now that's down to 18%. In the UK, it's down to 7 or 8% who identify as feminists. And a lot of it is to do with all of this bullying behavior, the Tim Hunt thing, Shirtgate, Matt Taylor, right? All of those things add to this public consensus that these ladies are they're really not nice, right?
Don't forget Gregory Allen Elliott also.
There are so many stories about this kind of nastiness that somehow, if you disagree with them in some way, there is something wrong with you. It's not a question about ideas. It's an alarming tactic because it's so intimidating. And I think that's the most significant thing about what has been going on that I've been involved in. I think it's a big drama that is designed to intimidate other men.
Well, and I think that there's this tendency among a lot of men, and it's not just your typical virtue signaling that people engage in. Like we call it sort of one good man syndrome, and men have engaged in this throughout history. It's I'm the one good man, and all of those men over there are the bad men, and so I'm on your side, honey, ladies, and yeah. So I mean, it's a way of distinguishing himself from all of the other men and trying to place himself in an alpha position in the pack, and yet it backfires too. I mean, male feminists tend to be like the most emasculated, the most trepidatious. I was reading, oh God, where was it? It was on SRS Men. Shit Reddit says men. So it's like ultra radical feminist subreddit for men, and some of these guys, 40 years old and a virgin, I'm going to spend my 40th birthday crying, I treat women, the way a good feminist should, and yet and I know I shouldn't be saying this because it means I'm entitled. I feel entitled to sex, but I'm just like, dude, grow a pair, right?
Exactly.
Like,
he doesn't need any enemies. He's his own worst enemy.
Yeah. I have a good example of that too. It's another quote. Jeffrey J. Cohen, director of the Medieval and Early Modern Studies Institute at George Washington University, said this, quote, "It was a blow to find out a respected medievalist whom many people have used in their dissertations and in their work could have such a website. It would seem you are quite the pariah." That's what I'm saying. So yeah, I mean, and this Jeffrey Cohen person, he also said that thank goodness that there are more women getting involved with medieval studies, that in a way that essentially they would rescue the discipline from people like you, which I find really funny. But this kind of thing is it is common, and I actually honestly while male feminists can really be frustrating for me, I actually really feel sorry for them, because I know that they mean well, I think, but they're just really, really misinformed, and they're in that fog that you described.
I think they feel guilty, and I think they are very uncomfortable with any sense of power at all. They're what a friend of mine calls Mother May I feminists. They're like those little rats in a cage. They're always looking to see, is this okay? Is that okay? Will I be rewarded for this, or will I be punished for that? They are not independent. They are afraid to take risks, and they really, I think they really hide behind feminism.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. No, I think you're absolutely right. There's a oh crap, I lost it. I was gonna say something and it's gone. Never mind.
Well, here's the thing. If you have a masculine spectrum of competition, if you have like sort of a complex of or a culture within which you need to distinguish yourself, and you feel like you cannot do that on the metrics provided in that culture, it's a very tempting thing to believe when feminists tell you that the culture itself is toxic, that it's harmful to everybody, it's harmful to men, it's harmful to women, it's harmful to society, right? And so why would you want to compete within that arena anyway, right? And so you're better than that, so you come over here with us. I think that seems to be what's driving a lot of it.
Yeah,
it's original sin. That's what I was going to say. For men, when male feminists believe that their very existence is original sin, and they have to live in a constant state of asking for forgiveness, of trying to essentially be accepted into the gates,
right.
of the woman.
Right.
Yeah.
I think you're exactly right. Somebody else is in charge. They are not in charge, and they are, I think, essentially fear-driven. They are afraid to stand. You don't really know what they represent because everything they represent is part of the general party ideology. And that's what happens at these conferences. They sit around and agree with each other. And one of the lessons that I see they have drawn from the last 2 weeks is that, as they're saying, we need a more inclusive version of medieval studies. And the irony to me is that they achieve a more inclusive culture by excluding people who disagree with them. And I think that's a typical scapegoat maneuver, and it's a sign of how weak they are. They use a crisis like this to build up their sort of, their fighting credentials. We're standing up against this monster from, this Neanderthal Frantzen, and now we can feel good about ourselves because we're all beating on the same guy. That's the way in which communities that scapegoat people always, raise their self-image by getting somebody else out. But it's a sign.
No, I was just going to say I've seen some other video talks and about the R versus K reproductive strategy, and this is going like back into some biology stuff. But are you aware of the R versus K reproductive strategies?
No, I was going to ask you.
Oh, well, I don't know that I'm as qualified to talk about it as maybe Karen is, but I've heard things that where essentially the male feminist approach to what they're doing has a lot to do with this R versus K. So R versus K selection is essentially one is where you have like I believe it's like the alpha male that's going to attract the mates through his ability to essentially control his environment, protect them, and that attracts them. That's sort of like the biker guy that the bad boy that women are attracted to. And then the other is the person who is is critical of them, and he's like the nice guy, and he wants to essentially get what it's the different approach. It's basically the more passive way of trying to get some reproductive success, and these are two different attitudes, and the humans are, from what I've heard, they're unique because we actually, while most animals in the animal kingdom only typically sort of line up with one of those, humans and like some other primates can actually cross into both, where they and it just depends on I don't know, like specific groups or cultures. So I wasn't sure if you were aware of it. I'm not like really like well learned on it, but I've looked at it and it's pretty interesting stuff. So
I have heard I've heard this described in terms of horses. Domination. The alpha horse is the one who breeds the most females, and the most horses will be descended from the alpha horse rather than the other horses. The strongest one is the most attractive one. It's an idea like that, yes?
Yeah, something like that. But while we were talking about someone in the chat has a question, so I want to throw it out there. Hi, Professor Frantzen. Can I ask you your opinion on the feminist idea that 50% of medieval warriors were all female?
Nonsense.
I think they recently discovered that there may have been shield maidens during the time of the Vikings, or whatever. What are your thoughts on that? I mean,
well, it's the idea that 50% of warriors in medieval culture were female is utter nonsense. If anything, even approaching that were true, it would have revolutionized scholarship on medieval warfare long ago. There are lots and lots of statistics about how men were recruited and fed, how many laundresses accompanied troops marching from England to France, so on and so forth. I mean, this isn't a question of guessing about what's inside a black box. We actually know the size and makeup of lots of medieval armies. Here and there are always the Joan of Arc types. Here and there are always women who manage to disguise themselves as men and fight. But they are few and far between.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where stories like this come from, but they're from people who are a long way away from the Middle Ages.
I think what it was, what got them on this whole thing was that they had found some burial sites of women who were buried with weapons, but that isn't necessarily indicative of them actually being.
No, because burials are often highly symbolic, you know, and people may have inherited weapons and armor. I have read a fair bit. I've done a little bit of archaeology. I don't know too many examples like this. I have heard of women being buried with weapons, in which case they weren't so much about fighting as about social status, because weaponry is very expensive, and being buried with a weapon, I mean, you know, that's a very expensive thing to do, to bury a weapon, because weapons cost a lot, and a weapon that's buried is not going to be used again. So that's a highly significant statement. But in any case, I would say that we're talking about exceptions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I figured as much. But we wanted to put out there. I thought that was a great question for any of you guys who are wondering, because we're going to get into academia in a second and how feminism, I think, has affected it, or has been for a long time. But I want to ask you something else. I've noticed that, you know, in case anyone knows, you are gay.
Right.
And you were, even though you were, typically, feminism is often seen as something that should intersect well with LGBT activism.
Right.
But you're not. This goes back to the original quote that my anecdote from earlier when I talked about Milo Yiannopoulos, who is also openly gay, but he's not the kind of gay person that feminists like.
Right.
So
I'm not either, as you noticed.
So what have you found? First of all, why do you think it is important? Feminists find it important to include LGBT, the issues of lesbian and gay men in their you know, in their sort of wheelhouse. And what have you seen of that? Like how does that add to the feminist fog?
Well, I think the key word in all of these categories is victim. These people are all wronged. It doesn't matter what fancy Ivy League school they teach at, or how many $100,000 they make a year, or anything like that. If they are a woman, a feminist, if they are gay, they have been wronged and they are angry. And they are always injured and they are always on the warpath. This is a key component of their identity. And they like to see themselves, even though most of these feminists that I know inside the academia are upper middle class and white, they like this idea of being part of an alliance that includes gay men and includes different kinds of minorities, because then they don't feel so burdened by their social privilege. But I think the key to the alliance is the word victim. And I think when you identify yourself as a victim, you are simply admitting that somebody else has your ball, somebody else controls your life and controls your identity. But victimization is a great way to intimidate people and acquire power. And I think that the gay men realized that feminism gave them great political cover, because a lot of men would accede to feminism what they wouldn't give to other gay men. And I think that's where this alliance came from. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, I've noticed that over the years, feminism has gone from just talking about women's rights, and then it's been sort of like trying to create an umbrella where it's putting other things underneath it. That's why they've been talking about it as this is sort of like what the fourth wave is, and it's calling itself intersectional feminism or
Right.
And it's trying to put in the rights of people of color, people from
Right.
lower income, people,
Yes.
like I said, the disabled, the
Yes.
mentally
You are correct.
disabled, and so on. Yeah.
You are correct. I think part of what drives this is their attempt to disguise or conceal their elite status. These are people who, in many cases, make a lot of money compared to what people do who work 8 to 5 or 9 to 5. They don't work very hard. There are a lot of benefits to a professional life in the academy. And one way they have of taking some of the shine off of this privilege they have is to pretend like, they're the rising tide lifting all boats.
Mm-hmm.
They're not lifting all boats, but I think they are, I think they are trying to look a little less privileged.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let's see. I'm getting a little bit of an echo. I think it's on your. Do you mind if Alan? I'm gonna mute you real quick. Oh no, there's no echo now. It's okay. Never mind.
I heard it
It
briefly
comes and
too.
goes. It's weird. What do you think of the state of academia today and its attitudes toward masculinity in men and boys? That's the question. I mean, this is a big question, but yeah.
If you had lived my life for the last 2 weeks, you would say that you had a very low opinion of it. And I do. I think what you can see in the way in which these people have responded in this to-do that I've been looking at for the last 2 weeks is that we have a country full of professors who are afraid of ideas. Their intellectual integrity is not as important as their social solidarity. I think we could see something very similar to this last December when students all over the country went into vice presidents and provosts and dean's office and shouted at them and said they wanted the university to be a place of comfort. Well, these professors, Cohen and Eileen Joy, and these other people who have been going after me, you know what they don't like about me? I'm not comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
People like me are not comfortable. You sit around and talk about bullshit with me, I'm going to put up my hand and say, just a minute. Let's talk about the suicide rate of men. Let's talk about men's health. Let's talk about men's cancer. Why are we always talking about, why do all of these social concerns only attach to women? Somebody who wrote me this week talked about, he went to a performance report at the college where he teaches, and one of the deans stood up and said that by far the poorest academic performance at this college was in men 20 to 24. And the whole room burst out in laughter. That's what I think of academia. That's what I think of academia. It's not about education.
It's about making a
Sorry?
I don't know. I'm making a joke. Have you seen what was going on with Yale and I think the Yale University thing, and there was some other colleges, Mizzou and stuff like that, where that whole victim mentality has made it to where students aren't even there to sort of challenge ideas or yeah.
No, me. That's what people like me do. We want to challenge these things, and the response to this is not good.
Mm-hmm.
Because these people are not intellectuals. It's like all they are these political creatures who believe in whatever they believe in about inclusiveness and so on and so forth. And you simply can't challenge that without challenging like the core of who they are. Ideas are not something you can discuss with them anymore.
They've internalized the identity.
Yeah, I think that puts it well, right? Yeah.
And well, I mean, and even if you
wait,
feminist...
I'm gonna mute you for a second. To unmute yourself, there's actually a button in the Hangout to let you do that. But we're getting an echo, and the people in the chat are having a hard time hearing what Karen is saying. So I'm gonna mute you real quick.
The clinging to even just the word feminism. There are reasons for that above and beyond the internalization of the identity that I'm actually going to do a video on next week. But essentially the word itself is so like it's not just a word describing their beliefs. It is actually like saying, you know, I'm Canadian, or I'm an earthling, or like it is an intrinsic part of the self. And so when you're attacking feminism, when you're actually attacking the ideas behind it and calling it feminism, you can attack an idea and not attribute it to feminism, and sometimes they'll even agree with you, right? That, you know, sex work should be, you know, legalized, or that you know, porn should be regulated properly and remain legal, or whatever, right? All of these things, more sex ed in schools, you know. You can present ideas that they will agree with you on, even if you're criticizing feminism, as long as you don't say the word feminism, as long as you don't include that label, because the label is who they are.
Yeah.
Okay. You can unmute.
Yeah, I think are you muted still, Alan? Yeah, you are. You'll have to okay. Mouse over if you mouse over the Google Hangout, you should have the option to unmute. And I think that Control D also does it. I can't hear you. I don't know what's going on. So I'm sorry.
I think he's frozen.
No.
He appears to be frozen.
Oh
no.
I can still see him. He seems to be moving around just fine. At least on my thing.
Does he?
It says frozen. Now,
oh, okay, on my display he's...
Technology sucks. I still can't hear you. Okay, do you have a
hover your cursor up at the top of the window of the screen, and it'll come up with this little menu with a phone and a gear and just there's a microphone with a slash through it. It'll be red, and it'll be the first one on the left, and just click that.
No, we can't hear you. Can you hear us?
Can't you unmute him? You have control.
I cannot unmute him. It doesn't let me do that.
It does. Allison can unmute me.
How do you do that?
I don't know.
I can't even mute him.
But yeah, you have to. You just.
Okay, let's try this. I hope this isn't too extreme, but you could also try leaving and coming back in. You hang up and then just rejoin the call. Okay. Sorry, guys. Google. What are you going to do? Do you guys in the chat have any question? They're saying that it looks frozen, but I don't see that. There seems to be movement going on.
Well, he was moving for me a little bit.
There he is.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I did. Okay.
No, it's all right. Sometimes there's an echo that forms, and you have to, if you mute and unmute, it'll go away. This is just, I don't know, it's just a Google thing, so. All right. Are you talking, Alan?
I have a question. Okay, because I recognize some of the names that you cited in your FemFog piece, and a lot of the terminology that I, have stumbled across on, the Red Pill subreddit, the Rational Male blog. You cited Rollo Tomassi, didn't you? And Jack Donovan.
Yes.
Jack was one of the first writers that I actually stumbled across when he was still writing articles at a blog called The Spearhead. He did an amazing set of articles called In Praise of Country Women or something like that. Absolutely great articles. And I just, how did you stumble on those guys?
You know, a student of mine, I did a reading project with a student on masculinity, and he had poked around on the web a little bit, and he found a blog that mentioned Jack Donovan. And I took a look at Jack Donovan. I mean, in other words, it was pure accident, pure coincidence. But as soon as I read a few lines of what Donovan was saying, I sat down and ordered 3 of his books because I thought, well, I mean, you talk about red pill. Here it is. You know, he not only is a good writer, but I was really excited by how fearless he was. And as I read his work and I had a little bit of a conversation with him, my own positions got clearer and clearer. I mean, I stepped farther and farther out of the shadow, so to speak. And, you know, I think the thing that bothers me the most about what has gone on is that the way in which the feminists have turned it into something against women, whereas my every motivating minute is to be doing something to lift up men and to help men become stronger. I don't see, you know, they're talking about hating women and misogyny in my website. I'd like to know where they see it. I mean, I have looked around, and there are a lot of websites that say a lot of disrespectful things about women. You're not going to find them on my website. In fact, if I know that Brian had talked about my sort of 3 main points on FemFog, but you know, it's all about being informed, having data, and being clear and being reasonable, not being strident and abusive. So I'm really astounded that looking at the things that I write, well, what I can see, because we're basically talking about this weird subset of the population that's professors. They are so far removed from popular culture, from the real world, it's almost unbelievable. And they have never looked at any of these, like you're talking about Rollo Tomasi and Jack Donovan. They've never even heard of them, much less read their work. They're upset by me. They should take a look at some of these dating websites, right? I mean, you know, and their whole thing that I'm discouraging women from entering the profession. I mean, the profession is dominated by women in the humanities. So they live in this little microcosm of precious people like themselves. Boxing really busted me out of that in a big way. You know, you just cannot talk like a professor around boxers. It's just not possible. And that was really liberating for me. I grew up on a farm in Iowa. I was intimidated because I was a little kid and everybody else was bigger, you know. I realized I could talk. That's how I ended up teaching. And it was one of those ways in which I limited my own masculinity pretty much to my brain. When I got around boxers, I thought, wow, you know what? A lot of men aren't professors. And a lot of women aren't professors. You know, they live real lives. And these websites bring all of that real world stuff into this discussion we're having about sex and gender and masculinity in a way that the feminists who've been attacking me they are simply unaware of it. Donovan, Tomasi, all that stuff. They have no idea.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I think a lot of them would recognize some of the names. You know, at least a lot of the sort of the pop feminists online, maybe not the ones in academia. What I found really interesting, because I mean, like, what is it, Sunnybrook in New York State? They have the first ever men's studies program in the country and all of that, and it's got Eve Ensler and Gloria Steinem sitting on the board, and
right.
I know.
Oh, right. You know what it's all about? What do women want?
How can, well, it's not about that. It's about shaming men and making them feel bad about
what women want. That's right, and that's what men's studies is. How can you turn men into what women want? I mean, I thought that's a great example that you bring that up. When I read that stuff I'm going to write about it. When I read that in the New York Times, people were saying, "Oh, isn't that great? men's studies are making it in academia. Look at this great article in the New York Times. I practically choked. It's the last thing men's need, because they're already getting that from women's studies. You know,
that's the aren't they approaching men's studies from the same way that feminism discusses men's issues, right? Like if you saw the he for she speech that Emma Watson gave, where she talked about the ways in which feminism can benefit men, it's always in this: we will allow you permission to be human, so that you can better serve women. Hence the he for she thing.
Perfect.
And it's got nothing to do with like what it doesn't even come from a place of curiosity or empathy towards what men actually might want or need outside of women, of how women benefit outside of it, just for their own mental health, for their own physical health, for their own ability to bond with each other.
No, absolutely not. I mean, it's all about serving the interest. It's all about the female imperative, as Tomasi calls it.
Yeah, the rats in the maze, right?
Yeah, exactly right. The scientists are in charge, and they're the ones deciding who gets punished and who gets rewarded.
Well, but I think Tomasi would be the first to tell you that, I mean, this is what women say they want, and they may ardently believe that they want men to behave like this, but they're not happy when men behave like that. It just makes them angry and abusive. So it's really unfortunate, and they're looking at men, feminists, and feminists like Michael Kimmel, who happens to be running this program in New York.
Yeah.
They look at they don't seem to be able to understand men as they are. They seem to think that if men don't cry, it's because they're cold and they don't have emotions, right? If men don't cry at sad movies, it's because they lack compassion. And when you think about some of the amazing things that men sort of do that women don't tend to do, like jump onto the subway tracks to grab that guy who fell down there, right, and haul him back up, and all of those things, those are men acting on their compassion. And it's just because they don't express those things in the same ways that women do, feminists they don't seem to have any other lens than the female brain in order to even try to understand what men are like.
Right.
And
which is what women said about men for years.
Sorry?
Which is what women said about men for years. You only see me as something you can use. They do exactly the same thing as you just said.
Of course. Well, I think a lot of feminist stuff is projection. Like, I think the whole patriarchy narrative that, that men constructed some system that, it privileges men by oppressing women, sort of across the board. I think that is actually what these particular feminists who cooked it up, who a lot of them happen to be like extremely damaged people, they were thinking to themselves, well, if I was in charge of society, right, I'd be screwing over the opposite sex in favor of my own. So that's what these guys must have been doing all through history, right? And they just have this complete lack of understanding of what men's natures are, what they're like. Even the idea that men would gang up with each other and treat each other preferentially in order to fuck over women is like, that shouldn't even enter into the realm of something that you would think is possible if you understand male psychology. And yet they believe that this is how society's operated for the last 14,000 years.
And they think that patriarchy is good for all men. I have a page on patriarchy. Patriarchy is bad for men. I mean, patriarchs oppress women and most men. That's what patriarchy does. And patriarchy also, in this way of oppressing men, separates men from their feelings and from their emotions. So this idea that patriarchy is simply something men do to women is very incomplete. Patriarchy is also something men do to men. And of course, within women, there's a lot of competition and oppression as well.
Yeah, well, and I think that a lot of this sort of patriarchal standards and norms are actually imposed on men by women. I mean, if you look at Emma Watson's he for she speech, all that is like patriarchy dialed up to 11. It's just, oh, you know, chivalry, you know, men protect women and step in and do stuff for them. There's a novel idea, revolutionary, never tried it before, might not work, right? Like, what?
Yeah, exactly. Right, exactly. Yeah.
Let's give it a shot and see what happens.
See if we can get a couple thousand guys to sign up for this shit.
Yeah.
And,
but let's unpack your 3-step process, because I really like what you wrote here to escape the feminist fog. And maybe I'll read them and you can like do a little elaboration. This is for people who may not have seen the essay, but if you can, I included a link to it in the low bar. I do really like it. I think you should totally look at it. It's really cool, and I really like one of these steps. But let's look at it. Okay, so step 1, be independent. Don't feel compelled to be a feminist. You do not have to be a feminist to be a good man. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, it's my response to compulsory feminism. Men are afraid to say that they're not feminist. It's like saying they're not rational in academia. So I think what I was trying to sketch out there was the possibility for a man to say, you know, I've got different kinds of views about feminism. I believe in certain kinds of equality. I think other things are exaggerated, and I wouldn't call myself a feminist. I just think somebody ought to be able to say that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I think it's about independence, and I think behind that is this idea that, you know, a lot of men are afraid. They're afraid to say anything that might set them apart from the crowd.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing, though, too, is there is a bit of feminism asks people to be essentially collectivist, and it's a collectivist attitude. And what you would need to be in order to fight against it, or to be, you know, is to, like you said, be independent, or essentially have a more individualist mindset.
Yes, a collectivist. I think you're exactly right. Yes.
Yes.
So think for yourself.
Exactly. Okay, so the second one, this is my favorite, actually. Be informed. When you speak, distinguish data from judgments, and base your discussions with feminists on data. And the reason why I like this one a lot is because, well, first of all, your examples are really great, but it's not just something that you can use when you are looking at feminism or you know, debating with feminists, but in a lot of, you can use it in your everyday life. It's essentially a good lesson on how to think and how to discuss ideas.
Right.
So
it's not my idea. I learned it in my men's group, where they told us in that weekend, a lot of men think their judgments are data. And I thought, what are they talking about? And then they use an example like that. My wife started an argument versus my wife and I argued. Well, one of them is a piece of data. There was an argument. But as to who started it, well, that's a judgment. And I thought, well, you know what? So much of what I hear, you know, people are just exchanging judgments and nothing actually gets down to any data. What do you actually know about how many women there are in the humanities? What do you actually know about labor or something like that? You know? As opposed to what do you think?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's really that's my favorite step, because again, it's you can use it for just about anything. I mean, another example you make is the movie lasted 2 hours versus the movie was boring. The movie lasted 2 hours is data. That's how long it was. That's something that cannot really be contested. The movie was boring is a judgment because it's subjective.
Yeah.
However, if you say the movie bored me, that is actually, it's not data about the film, but it is data about you and how you reacted to it. And I think that's a fairer thing to say, and it's open to more, you know, discussion, right?
I think you made a very good point again when you said this isn't just about feminism. this is really about anything, whether you're talking about boxing or football or the price of cars. You know, is this car really more expensive than that car? Can you actually compare the prices, or do you just think? And the people I respect are the people who know things. When I was teaching, that's what I always wanted students to understand. Know things. Know things. It's really great to know things.
Yeah, I think that academia in general can benefit from, especially probably now without getting into a whole thing about education, but I think that the ability to learn how to think and how to approach queries or questions is something that we should be learning way before we get into university. People
Yeah.
shouldn't be having this talk by the time they get to college about discerning judgments from data.
But one of the things feminism bought into, or I don't know whether feminism bought into it or it bought into feminism, is the idea, very common in universities, that one idea is as good as another. One sentence is as good as another. You shouldn't really say one book is better than another. There's something wrong with a hierarchy like that. So, we don't really want to say, well, this one, we don't really want to bring data into the discussion because we don't want anybody's feelings to be hurt. Judgments promote collectivism. Data really drives debate. Where people are discussing data, they're going to disagree because they've got really specific things in front of them. But we can all agree to hate this guy who has this crazy website. That's just a judgment. How much they actually know about it in terms of the data, wow. Like I said before, they couldn't pass a quiz.
Yeah, that's actually interesting because when you were talking about it, I was just thinking about how people, a lot of time feminists, but they often use anecdotes and feelings and their standpoints,
yes,
or even the way that they decide to interpret data as a means to essentially make them into facts. So
yes.
I think that is it standpoint theory, postmodernism, complete subjective reality, where they say, oh well, the way I'm looking at this data that I'm getting the feeling that this is what it means, and it's all it is I have the conclusion. Now I just need to find all of the data that supports my conclusion.
Perfect. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Well, one of the things about standpoint theory that's so insidious is it employs something that it calls epistemic privilege or something like that. So essentially, it contends that the oppressor does not really need to know about his own internal world or subjective experiences or the experiences of others because he's in a position where he doesn't have to. And yet the oppressed are the ones who have that privilege of not only knowing their own experience better, but knowing their oppressor's experience better than even he does. And so once you've situated women in this position of epistemic privilege, then you can completely disregard anything a man, particularly a white straight man, has to say about men and women, his own experiences, anything like that, because he doesn't really know.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really allow for, okay, so what happens if and when, like every other sort of oppressor-oppressed situations, like oppressor class, slave class, and you have the slave revolt, and then suddenly it's now these people who are in charge and they're oppressing somebody else. How do they have they planned ahead for this, for women to overshoot the mark, for women to actually end up having more power than men, and men being sort of on the bottom rung of society, just in general, not just those men, but all men, how do they plan for this privilege to change hands? Have they thought that through? No.
No, of course not. That's a really great description, that whole nonsense about epistemic privilege and how some people know and other people don't know, and and don't need to know and all this kind of nonsense. I mean, it has a direct connection to victimization as well. You know, I think that came
well,
up
that's why they won't let go of their victimhood, and they won't admit that women are doing okay, because they would lose this privilege that gives them.
Yes, yeah, I think that's exactly right, and that's partly why this is such a frustrating discussion, because they are both powerful and they are addicted to the idea of victimization, which is actually the source of their power.
Yeah.
Well, and then they have what's the one problematization is how, you know, if Brian here makes a statement, right, and I want to problematize it, right, I just ask, you know, who's making the statement? A man, right?
Yep.
Why is he making the statement here and now? Because he's, I don't know, a misogynist. You know, who will the statement potentially harm? Women. Who will it potentially hurt?
Yeah.
Men. You know, and therefore now you can just completely disregard what he said. Its truth value has no bearing on anything. He does not belong in the discussion at all.
So that you've just given us a brilliant thumbnail sketch of what's happened to me in the last 2 weeks.
Oh yeah, no, and it's nothing more than an ad hominem attack that's been legitimized as a tool of philosophy and discourse, right? That's
how can you know? How can you say anything if you're a man? I mean, that's
exactly. Yeah. I go to college too in Chicago, the Illinois Institute of Art, and just about every class I've been in, I mean, including biology and chemistry, have had feminism in them in some capacity, including biology and chemistry. The only exceptions have been my math classes, and it's probably just because I haven't figured out a way to put it in there yet. And I had one class. It was a Western Civilization history class that had some of it, but the professor was open to new ideas. And I got into a discussion in that class because the subject of women came up, and I brought in some evidence to sort of like, you know, that could be interesting data that counters the narrative that women, for, you know, since the dawn of history, have been under the heels of men, to the benefit of men and at the detriment of women. And another man in the class, a younger guy, he stood up and said, "It's funny that the person who was making these arguments is a man," and that was his argument against me.
Absolutely.
Was the fact that I was a man.
So you should. How dare you speak?
Yeah, and I was like, so I can't have an opinion on it, and you're a man, and you're actually providing a counter opinion. So does that, like, which one of us is less valid? You know? So.
Right, exactly. Right. I can imagine how the discussion went.
Okay, so let's see. I'm going to go to the last of your 3-step program. So be disciplined. Stick to facts. To do that, you have to master data about the state of men and the modern world. Read and remember it. And you make some recommendations on books such as Roy F. Baumeister's Is There Anything Good About Men? Right. Warren Farrell's The Myth of Male Power. And Warren Farrell we had him on last Thursday.
Great.
And also very valuable but less well known, Tim Goldich, Loving Men, Respecting Women, The Future of Gender Politics. Would you mind extrapolating on that a little bit, that last step?
Most important thing that I'm trying to say there is to be respectful and to have a discussion, not an argument. That's what we've seen my colleagues are unable to do over the last 2 weeks. It sounds, I'm getting such a great perspective on it in the conversation we're having here, getting some sense of what the larger discussion is like versus this little buzz from inside the academic world where I've spent so much time. But I think the most important thing I want to say to everybody involved is that we're talking about ideas, and data are important, and we have to find some kind of a level at which men and women can sit down and talk without feeling like they're arguing and fighting for power. And I focused on the word discipline because I think discipline is an important part of masculinity. And I have often been very disappointed in how little discipline my students, male students in particular, had. Um, there's a certain level of impatience, and then they just want to say what's on their mind. So I thought what this whole idea of 3 steps was pretty much trying to get across was, there's a method to this. This just isn't broad, oh, go out there and be reasonable and show some respect and, be cool, but actually just try to remember, how can I do this better? Masculinity is something we achieve every day. It's not like a pill we take or something we can put in our wallet and carry around with us. And I think these 3 steps in all the web pages that I put up, I think they're challenging. People want to have this discussion on an anecdotal or emotional level.
Yeah.
They don't want to deal with ideas in a disciplined, rational way. So I think, I think one of the buzzwords around this topic is civility. And I try not to use those kinds of buzzwords, but when I'm telling people, to be deliberate and disciplined, I'm telling them to be civil.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I want to ask you a question about one of your books. I just want to know what it's about. It's called Before the Closet, Same-Sex Love from Beowulf to Angels in America.
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I got interested in how whenever scholars, gay scholars, queer theorists, feminist scholars, talked about men's relationships in medieval cultures, they were always trying to homoeroticize them. And I just wanted to know what same-sex love was that was something besides sex. And I started looking at warrior cultures and seeing how men loved each other in warrior culture without the topic of sex ever coming up, and how men would sacrifice themselves for their comrades, not just for society, but more specifically for their fighting brothers, as an act of love, and how they found nobility in this kind of same-sex love. It was about heroic culture, but heroic masculinity. Because I felt the feminists talking about same-sex love in the Middle Ages, they're always looking for their antecedents. They're always looking for ways to queer the Middle Ages. I think what was exciting to me was to look for ways in which same-sex love could be expressed in non-sexual ways in the Middle Ages that we could think about too. Boxers do it all the time.
So we're not really talking about homosexuality. We're just talking about more like a brotherhood kind of thing.
We're talking about brotherhood. Yes, exactly. It's same sex.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It's love. But I think what a lot of people have tried to do is to go back to the Middle Ages and, as they like to say in the old days, queer them. And their whole project was to say they were just like us. They weren't just like us. So I wanted to put on the map this idea of heroic masculinity as a form of love, and talk
That
about
actually sounds like an interesting topic.
To me, because one thing that motivated this was you mentioned the word chivalry when we started talking. I got very interested in World War I, and I was so moved. I read hundreds of letters by men who fought World War I, how they wrote about each other, how they died for each other, how they held each other when they died, and I thought their relationships with other men aren't sexual, but there's a kind of love and suffering there and sacrifice there that is really ennobling, and that is something now we can aspire to. And I mean, medieval knights talked about this themselves. So it's not all about sex.
No, but that's really interesting stuff that I've always liked. Actually, I was just thinking about, I'm a cinephile. I love movies a lot. And when I was visiting a friend in Calgary earlier this year, I brought a film with me that I really liked that I wanted her to see. It was called The 13th Warrior, and it was based on the film, the book, Eaters of the Flesh.
Yes.
One of my favorite movies, and it was filmed just like 100 miles from where I was living at the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and two of the Vikings in that actually just were from town. So.
Oh, wow! Yeah. Really, that's awesome.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I love that movie, and you know, I was trying to like put into words why, and it wasn't just that. It was things like, I mean, I really like movies about you know, guys in the like war films. You know, these sorts of movies like 13th Warrior, and you know, where you have these guys that come together to do something, and they make incredible sacrifices, and they do, like, they have each other's backs, and they work cooperatively, and they make, you know, and 13th Warrior is just really good. And I was thinking about that film when you were describing this sort of you know, this sort of love between men that isn't sexual, that isn't, you know, it's just brotherhood. It's a bromance thing, yeah.
Yes, yeah, it's a form of brotherhood. The men's group that I'm in is very big on brotherhood, and I didn't really understand it until I got in the men's group, what it was to have a brother.
Well, I think that that's something that feminists seem to be, you know, and I think maybe even women in general. You know, if you go back to that petition to the King of England in 1674 or whatever it was, to ban coffee houses because, you know, their men were all just spending all their time together in coffee houses and not coming home and fucking us like they're supposed to, you know, and the King of Spain, you know, he thinks he has problems. He had to order his men not to perform the grand kindness to their wives more than 9 times a night, and yet our husbands can't even get it up. And all of this sexual shaming and stuff going on, but I think that part of it is like that women have sort of a natural suspicion of men when men just go off and are alone together, especially if they go off and are alone together with no purpose. I mean, it's maybe one thing if they're like raising a barn or something, but if they're just going there to bond or something, like. And I can understand it. I think it's projection again, because I don't know if you've ever listened in on a group of women having coffee and listened to the way some of these women will talk about their men. I mean, it's brutal. It's absolutely freaking brutal. It's almost like, why'd you marry him if you hate him so much?
About the same thing.
Right? Yeah, they think that men are like off all on their own, plotting, you know, how are we going to oppress women, or, you know, or talking shit about their wives, or, you know, or whatever. And it's just, I think that because of that suspicion that feminists in particular, and a lot of women do as well, have of men off in their own space, that's why we've seen all of these men's clubs have to become integrated. And we've gotten rid of, you know, like even the Boy Scouts, you know, state by state in the United States, they're having to admit girls into their ranks. But the Girl Scouts, that stays all girl, because they need a safe place away from the boys.
Boys don't need a safe.
They're undermining this ability of men to form these bonds, because once you introduce women into the mix, men are not going to interact in that way.
Right. Right.
So.
Exactly right. Yeah. I think that there is a suspicion about men's groups, that somehow when men are together they're plotting against women or something like this, that the only reason you have men is to support women. So men should always be on the wedding cake, they should always be holding the door, and all of these kinds of things. And there are amazing numbers of men who simply see themselves that way. You know, they're the guy who takes out the garbage and cuts the grass. He's the caretaker. You know, and he doesn't have his own relationships. He doesn't have his own world. He's just always performing to please somebody else and getting graded every day, which I think is terribly sad. So many men I talk to envy my boxing experience, which I think is very funny, because, you know, I box men, I don't box women, and it's a very male world, and it's incredibly freeing and exciting to strip life down to these 2-minute rounds. You know, this is how this is going to go, and what happens next is what counts. It's very male, it's very concrete, it's very physical, it's very real, it's very intense, and it's liberating. It's exciting. They all say, "Oh, I wish I could do that," you know, for this and this.
Just do it.
They're always, yeah, right, exactly. They always feel, you know, that they've got family, they've got wives, they've got girlfriends, and they always feel they don't have time.
Well, because then they're not there. They don't feel like they should have permission to do something just for themselves.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Their masculinity is there to serve somebody else. Their masculinity isn't there for other men. When you're boxing, your masculinity is there for your opponent as well as yourself.
Yeah. Well, and you can see in that whole culture of you know, bumping mitts and, you know, and then hugging after the match and all of that kind of stuff that tends to go on, and that is really encouraged. And you can see even in certain MMA fighters and stuff like that who kind of crap on those traditions.
Yeah.
When they eventually start losing, the fans are just like, they're like almost rejoicing, right? It's not like George St. Pierre, who is just absolutely humble. He's sort of the pinnacle of what that culture should create, just in how he behaves towards everyone and how he thinks of everyone and thinks of himself.
Right.
And I don't see anybody dancing when he loses. You know, nobody's cheering, nobody's jeering, nobody's, you know, doing a victory dance because he finally got his.
Yes.
You know, he can lose with honor, and
yeah,
there you go.
I think that's really great.
Yeah. Their honor and sportsmanship are and that discipline and that respect for you know, your peers. That's it's just as important as being good at doing it. You know, there is like an attitude that comes with it. It's like having all this power, which is essentially what, you know, like teaching someone to fight is, and then but also revering it and like knowing when to use it and when not to, and you know.
Couldn't agree more. Absolutely.
Well, you know, this is really good talk. I'm glad that you came on and joined us. I'm going to have to wrap it up, though. But would you come back for another Fireside Chat sometime, or maybe on the Thursday show?
I loved it. It was really marvelous. Great ideas, and it's so great for me to be coming out of this hellacious 2-week experience, hearing your perspectives and seeing, you know, what this conversation actually looks like in the much broader world you put it in. So I'm really up and very excited. Of course, I'd love to come back.
Good. I'd really like to look at the subject of you know, men and their love for each other in medieval times, during times of war, all over the world, throughout history up until today. And I think that would actually make a good main show topic that we could do if you'd be willing to come on some Thursday.
Love it.
Okay, awesome. All right. Thank you, Allen, for coming and joining us. Guys, there'll be links to both the article and his piece on the FemFog. You can also look at what people are talking about on Twitter with the hashtag FemFog if you are a tweeting person. And thanks, Karen, for hanging out with me because you had some good input as well.
Great. Brian as well. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, thank you. And we'll see you guys next